What's going on, everybody? I hope everyone's well. Today we're back with our AFC North season preview. Season's almost here, so without further ado, let's get started. Sam, take it away with how the AFC North played out last year.
So the AFC North played out in a way that a lot of people expected it to. With the Bengals won the division with a 12-4 record as they got elite play from their offense and good enough play from their defense. The Ravens had issues last year with consistency, and I think that'll be no different this year. And they finished 10-7 last year, albeit Lamar was out a lot of the second half of last year. Pittsburgh finished 9-8. They finished strong. They almost made the playoffs if games went their way. And the Browns finished 7-10 last year. Deshaun Watson was suspended the first 11 games of last year. And when he came back, he didn't look great.
Yeah, yeah, he
And
he clearly did not look like his Texan self, and I think that played a big role in why the Browns really couldn't get anything going over the last quarter of the season or so. Because Jacoby Brissett stepped in, he played solid. He's not a great starter by any means, but he's capable. He can get the job done. He's a smart QB. Doesn't take too many risks. And then, without further ado, my fourth place team is the Cleveland Browns. So I have them finishing 7-10 once again. Do not think they're going to be a playoff team this year. Myles Garrett and Zadarius Smith, Dalvin Tomlinson, that defensive line, that defensive front is going to be very good once again. I have no doubt, especially under new defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz. I think Joe Woods really held this defense back last year with the schemes. I just think nothing was really clicking, and I think with Jim Schwartz, former Eagles defensive coordinator, I think it's going to do wonders for this defense. The cornerback room is solid. I like Martin Emerson. I think he's going to take a big step up. Denzel Ward had a little bit of a down year last year, but I'm not too concerned. Safeties I don't love, but overall the defense, I really don't have any major concerns. I think Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is really going to blossom into that player we saw coming out of Notre Dame in 2021. Rest of the linebackers I don't love. Depth is a concern across the whole defense, but I think overall this defense should be a top 10 unit. The offense does raise some question marks, in my opinion, though. Nick Chubb is Nick Chubb. He's a top 3 running back in the league, the best pure runner. He can break tackles, great vision. There's really not a lot to dislike about him. The receiving room is okay, but it's not like a top half unit. I like Elijah Moore as a prospect coming out of Ole Miss. However, he's been supremely disappointing so far, and New York's a lot to blame for his situation, especially the quarterback play, but he hasn't done himself any favors either. Sam, what do you have for Cleveland?
I have a 10-7 finish and a wild card berth. I think that Deshaun Watson, given that he has had the off season to work and kind of take off that rust, because you got to remember, you spent 2 months no football. You couldn't practice with them, nothing. And I
Yeah.
think that he and Amari Cooper are going to be a dynamic too. I think Amari Cooper is going to have over 1,300 yards, have his best season since he was a Dallas Cowboy. And I think that their defense is going to help them do enough down the stretch to get them to the playoffs.
Once again. So my biggest issue with this team lies actually in the coaching staff. I loved what Kevin Stefanski did in 2020 and selling these flashing concepts that really eased Baker Mayfield into the game. However, the last 2 years, whether it be Brissett, Mayfield, or Watson, as a matter of fact, I just really haven't seen enough from him. That's really said. Like he can really be the guy that's going to lead this team long term and compete for an AFC North title down the road. And I think this very well could be his last season in Cleveland if they do finish under 500. And I think that is going to happen, and he will be fired at season's end. Deshaun
I
Watson,
th- I think
go
it's
ahead.
more on management um that the coaching staff has those issues because they keep changing the top guys over and over again. They bring in new personalities, they bring in new egos, and it hurts the team. Jadeveon Clowney.
Yeah, I think as for Watson, I'm very conflicted on him because one part of me really thinks he's gonna go back to the Houston days where he can play out of structure, he can make really any throw, great escapability, solid accuracy, great solid arm talent. But the other part of me thinks like he was just straight out awful last year, and I think that very well could continue with Stefanski at the helm. Just making poor decisions. Like Russ could be a part of that, but at the same time, like I didn't really see enough that says, wow, this guy who played well 3 years ago is gonna all of a sudden turn back the clock and be that elite quarterback he once was. So I think he'll be pretty average overall. Like I do think like by 2024 he can get back to that elite status he once was at, uh, down in the Lone Star State. However, I don't think that's gonna happen this year. Um, Strength of this team, I love Jim Schwartz. I love Nick Chubb. Watson's upside is really there. It's really potent. The O-line really all starters. I really think Joel Bitonio is solid. The center position's good. Not a lot to dislike there. Cornerbacks, I said I liked, and Myles Garrett's a perennial defensive player of the year candidate. I mentioned the weaknesses. Um, yeah, I basically said all I need to about this team. The ceiling and the floor, they're very far apart, and I think that it's really dependent on Watson, who really is this team's X factor. What do you have the Baltimore Ravens at, Sam?
I have the Baltimore Ravens finishing 11-6, and they get the 5 seed in the AFC. I think they faltered down the stretch without Lamar Jackson because Lamar Jackson wasn't there. You see, and it happened the year before when they collapsed and missed the playoffs. I think and Greg Roman's gone. Greg Roman's gone. They upgraded the receiving core. And I think that this is the year that we see the Rashad Bateman that Baltimore saw when they drafted him.
So, I'll start on the positive side of things. I do think that I think Kyle Hamilton is really gonna be arguably the best safety in football this year. I loved him as a prospect out of Notre Dame, and he only played up to my expectations as a rookie. Like there were some struggles at times, inconsistencies, but him and Marcus Williams as a dynamic duo, that is going to be a nightmare for opposing offensive coordinators to game plan for. Just them, just back. Depends on the concept that an offensive coordinator is running, but I'm really high on the safety duo, and I think it'll mask a lot of the issues that this cornerback room, especially the depth, could present. But I have Baltimore finishing 9-8 and missing out on the postseason, third in their division. Lamar Jackson, he's a force to be reckoned with, as always. Injuries and inconsistencies have really hindered him from being a top 3 MVP candidate the last couple of years, but we saw what he did in 2019, and we saw what he did when healthy in 2022. And I think he's gonna be closer to that 2019 form as long as he stays healthy, as long as his weapons on the outside stay healthy, as long as Todd Monken can install these concepts for him that Greg Roman really couldn't and cater to his strengths, especially as a passer. My rookie of the year for them is Zay Flowers. I think he definitely could eclipse 1,000 yards. I think it'll be just around that mark. I think he definitely will be the best receiver on this team. I loved him out of Boston College, and I think he's really going to be that number 1 receiver that Lamar Jackson has really been missing over the course of his entire career. Like Rashad Bateman, I still have a glimmer of hope for him. However, injuries and inconsistency has really plagued him from being that player I saw coming out of Minnesota a few years ago. I'm expecting a really big breakout year from David Ojabo, second round pick in 2022 out of Michigan. Injuries kind of prevented him from really doing much last year, but I think this year he can really step into a bigger role. They signed Jadeveon Clowney, but I doubt he'll do much. So I think Ojabo could be Ojabo and Hamilton, 2 2022 draft picks by Eric DeCosta, are going to play vital roles in this defense this year. Marlon Humphrey, I'm not as high on, especially this entire cornerback room. And the X Factor, Todd Monken. Mark Andrews, I forgot to mention as a strength. He's a top three tight end and has been for the last 4 years. Obviously Kittle and Kelsey, they're consistently mentioned among the top tight ends in the league. However, Mark Andrews should be in that category too, and I think he is year in and year out. He's a safety blanket for Lamar. Even with practice squad receivers, he's always there for him, and I think he needs to be appreciated more. John Harbaugh is an elite head coach. Does have some flaws, which we'll get to, but I think overall he's very good. Um, what do you think this team's ceiling is, Sam?
I think their ceiling is 12-5, 13-4, and their floor is around 8, 9, 7, and 10.
Yeah, I basically have the same thing. How do you think Todd Monken will do?
I think he'll do fine. Any improvement to Greg Roman will be an instant upgrade.
Yeah, I agree. Cornerback depth is a huge concern in my opinion. Like I mentioned Marlon Humphrey as a disappointment candidate. However, I still think he'll be solid enough to be a number one guy. However, behind that, there's like Rocky Sin, Jalen Amore Davis, and just not a lot of appealing players that I think could hurt this defense a bit. Um, um, Under John Harbaugh, and I think Eric DeCosta, like he's far from a perfect GM. Like, I like what he did. I liked what he did this offseason. However, there are glaring holes in this team that prevent them from being a playoff contender, in my opinion, and up there with the Burrow, Mahomes, and Allen, and Miami in the AFC. Um, and I think Odell Beckham, I think they overpaid him significantly. And I hate to say this as a guy who always has been an avid fan of him, but he's gonna be a drop machine this year. And I'm not really like I just don't see it with OBJ this year. What about you? What do you think of OBJ this year?
I agree with you. I think he underwhelms a bit, and I think that he'll fall down the depth chart to the 3 receiver by the end of the
I think
year.
he'll be the three as well, yeah. The Pittsburgh Steelers and Mike Tomlin. What do you got for them, Sam?
I have a fourth place finish, but they still have a winning record. This team just isn't good enough to compete. And I think after a bad start that their OC will get fired. I know the Steelers don't like to do that kind of stuff, but I think it happens here.
What are your expectations for sophomore quarterback Kenny Pickett?
I think it's gonna be like his rookie year. Starts struggles early, but slowly gets it together as the year goes on. But I think the overall will be a better year for him than he had his rookie year.
Yeah. I think the Steelers are going to be one of the most surprising success stories in football this year. I'm not one to buy into preseason a lot, but I do think the chemistry is rapidly growing between the sophomores Kenny Pickett and George Pickens. So I think they finish as a 7 seed, 11-6, take home second in this division. Let's talk about the offense real quick. I'm really high on this offense, despite Matt Canada, and he is a major issue. Don't get me wrong, but this offense with Isaac Seumalo, Broderick Jones, the O line should be at least an average unit, and one of the best tight end tandems in football with Darnell Washington and Pratt Freiermuth. One of them could do the blocking, one of them could do the dirty work receiving. The receiving core is very solid, in my opinion. I think Calvin Austin is a guy who's not really been talked about enough. He's a really sneaky, he's a dynamic, shifty guy who could be that number 3 or 4 guy there. Deontay Johnson, he has had drop issues in the past and actually didn't score a touchdown last year. However, I think with more stable quarterback play and a guy Pickens to take pressure off of him, I think he's going to really blossom back into that 2020 receiver we saw him be. However, George Pickens is the glue to this offense. In my opinion, he's going to be a top 15 receiver this year. He can make any catch. Like, I don't love his separation ability, but like we rarely see him drop a pass, and I think that him and Pickett are going to form a great connection in year 2. MVP TJ Watt doesn't really need to be explained all that much. Joey Porter's a guy who I think will struggle early, but I think will really find his footing in the second half of the year, and I think he could be in the running for Defensive Rookie of the Year. Sam, what are your thoughts on George Pickens?
I think that he's gonna have a big breakout year this year and potentially solidify his spot as a top 10 receiver. Not to
Yeah.
mention that the Steelers also have Allen Robinson as a bounce back candidate.
Yeah, he should definitely be a solid three. As I mentioned, Calvin Austin, I have higher hopes. His ceiling is higher, but Allen Robinson, experienced guy, veteran, I think will bring at the least some much needed leadership to this locker room alongside Mike Tomlin. Um, my letdown, I couldn't really pick one because I am really, really excited to see this team, but I think Cam Hayward, as he's getting a little older, could take a few steps back, but I doubt it'll be anything major. Um, and Matt Canada is a major question mark, and I think if this team finishes 8-9 or 9-8, I do think he'll be the main culprit here. And moving on to the division winner, what do you have the Bengals at?
I have the Bengals at 14-3. I think Joe Burrow not only wins the team MVP, but he wins the league MVP.
So I also have Joe Burrow winning the league MVP, as a matter of fact. I just think that this team is loaded offensively from top to bottom. The tight ends I don't love, but other than that, I'm expecting a bounce back year from Joe Mixon. If not, Chase Evans can take over. Trey Hendrickson, defensively, he's phenomenal. But this receiving core, from top to bottom, it is the best in football, if not the second best. Jamar Chase, I think he'll be the best receiver in football this year. There's like I love T. Higgins too. He's a jump ball specialist. Tyler Boyd's that glue. He's just the glue to this offense. Very, very, very reliable number 3 option, and I like Charlie Jones as a number 4 too. Sam, between this receiving core and Miami's, which one do you prefer?
Cincinnati's.
And see, I do
They just
too.
have Tyler Boyd kind of elevates it.
Mhm.
I do have questions about their defense, but I don't think that'll be a problem until we get to the
Yeah, I just think
postseason.
they're gonna like run through teams. This team reminds me a little bit of the 2011 Green Bay Packers, in which their defense wasn't excellent by any means, but they had the quarterback and they had the receivers that were just they were so dominant that they just like ran past teams. And I think that in the AFC, I think it's Burrow and Mahomes at the top. Um, Orlando Brown in the O line, I do have concerns about. Orlando Brown, he was inconsistent with Casey last year, and I think that'll really continue over to this year. But I think Daxton Hill and Miles Murphy, 2 young guys on the defense that I think are really going to be profound, have profound impacts on this team in 2023. Especially Dax Hill out of Michigan last year. I think he's going to really become the player I saw him out of college. What do you have the ceiling and floor as for this team?
My ceiling is 15-2. My floor is around 8-9.
Yeah, I have around the same for this team. What do you think about head coach Zach Taylor?
I think he's an average head coach. I think his talent definitely elevates him. But that's not necessarily a bad thing.
You don't think he holds the team back though, right?
I felt at times last year he did.
I think he did in 2021, but I think last year, uh, I think last year he was much better. And I like both the coordinators here for Cincy. They were able to retain both of them, which is a big part of why I'm so high on them this year. Um, I love the linebackers here too. I forgot to mention Jermaine Pratt is back once again. Um, Logan Wilson's guy I really like, and there's not too much to dislike about this team overall. So with that, signing off, Spencer and Sam for the AFC North.